everybody. Welcome to another episode of Still Rose's podcast. This podcast was created for women by women to elevate women's voices. I'm super excited today, as usual, with my guests because they've been such impactful, powerful women's voices. Today's guest, she is a leader in the corporate world, both in financial services and advertising, which if you work in corporate, you know how amazing that is, that she's killing it in both of those areas. But like many women, our guest today experienced burnout from not prioritizing her well-being or knowing how to manage her stress. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Shannon Talbot. Now, what I didn't mention is that she's also the author of this amazing book called Breaking Free. And Shannon, I'm going to gush just for a minute here because I started reading the book and it literally felt like me talking to myself while I was reading the book. And I love it because the book is really just in such a wonderful language in terms of like the tone and the messaging. So welcome to the podcast. Super excited to have you here. Why don't you just let the listeners know a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Jenny. It's great to be here. Hello, everybody. So a bit about myself. I live in Toronto, Canada. I'm a mom of two incredible boys who are, oh gosh, they just turned 9 and 11 now. We adopted them as babies. It's a whole journey in my book about fertility and stuff there if anyone's interested. And two incredible boys, married for 16 years. And I think the big part of my story is that in 2008, is the first time I assumed a new title, I guess you could say. So that's kind of where my story starts. I worked, out of university. I went into banking. Wasn't necessarily where I thought, oh, I'm going to grow up and work in banking. But it was just, it kind of fell into my lap and a great opportunity came along and it was really fun and exciting and then had an entrepreneurial spirit. So loved it. And then in 2008, I got married and I went back to school and I did my MBA. And that's when everything kind of started to change for me because I started what I call putting self-imposed expectations on. And I started telling myself stories like, oh, Shannon, you're a wife now. You have to act a certain way. And then in the corporate world, as I started moving my way up and getting more responsibility and starting to, being responsible for projects and people, with each role and each new responsibility, I told myself, oh, you have to act this way now. And I put all this pressure on myself and no one was doing it. My husband wasn't doing it, it was all me. And I started to lose a bit of myself and I started to act how I thought I should. And I use should in quotation marks, rather than what felt more authentic to me. And it only got worse as time went on. And then I became a mom and, all the pressure that comes with that. And I was very ambitious. I wanted to climb the corporate ladder. I wanted to do really, really well in my career. But at the same time, I started to notice it didn't light me up anymore. And a few years ago, my oldest, who was then 5, so I guess 6 years ago now, he was hospitalized for his appendix. And we spent 31 days in the hospital and he was totally fine after that, but it was a scary 31 days. And during that time was the first time my career kind of took a back seat. And I asked myself 3 questions. And I said, Shannon, are you happy? Are you healthy? And do you feel fulfilled? And my answers were like, not really. And for someone who's high achieving and like wanting to do so well in all areas, that was pretty hard to admit. And then with that came the guilt because it was like, oh my gosh, Shannon, on paper, you have it all. What could you possibly want different? Like, why do you want more? But that was something that once that happened, there was no turning back. And that's when I really started, looking after myself. We can get more into it. I won't just go into it too much here, but like looking after myself, but also I started working with a coach to figure out, okay, what do I want to do with my life? Like, what is it that will light me up? And in the meantime, I moved from banking into advertising, which was a super fun yet, oh my gosh, high stress, fast paced job. Mm-hmm. My client was a large US bank and it was, it was a lot, but also really fun and creative and strategic. But my kids started to suffer as a result, right? So I was super stressed all the time. I was bringing that home. I was short with them. I didn't have the patience and I was becoming this person that I no longer wanted to be. So fast forward to the pandemic, and I decided, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm going to chase my dream of having my own business. And I launched my own business where I do coaching and speaking, and then wrote this book really to help people live more meaningful lives.
So
I know that was a lot.
No, well, all right. So, truth be told, for the listeners, so obviously, I already mentioned I'm reading her book already, and so for me, like hearing you tell the story, it resonated so deeply with me. So I do want to, I'll share a little bit, and listeners are aware of a lot of like my background already because I do share so much. I had a very similar trajectory. And so I work in marketing and communications for pharmaceutical companies. So when you said like advertising, it's like so fast paced, and I'm like, I feel you. And in the book, you noted it, and I'm like, I know that strain there. And I also had a similar situation where I hit like a professional wall where I was like, I have literally achieved exactly what I set out to do. Because I had very intentionally been like, I'm gonna do this professionally. And a lot of it was the should, because I think all women have that like, well, I should be doing this, so I'm gonna do it. And for me, it was a little bit of a self-preservation because of my parents' divorce and my mom didn't work. And so I was like, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna have this really great career. So I like climbed the corporate ranks, and I went, every 2 or 3 years, I got my promotions, or I left the companies and moved on to bigger and better things. And I got to a point 3 years ago, so about the same time, about 3 years ago, where I hit this professional wall where I was like, wow, I got put on this project that was like heavy duty. I have twin girls who were 5 at the time, and my son was 6, and I got put on this crazy project that I had specifically asked not to be put on. And I got put on it, and I was forced into leading it, and it took me away from my kids and my husband for about 3 weeks. Like, I work from home, but to say, Shannon, that like from like 7 a.m. to about 4 or 5 p.m., I was just locked in my office. I would come out and make dinner, made sure everyone was bathed, put them to bed. I'd go back to my office. Like, it was intense. And people, when I say like, I didn't see anybody, I didn't speak to anyone, my husband kind of kept dropping hints like, what are you doing? Like, and he was getting frustrated too, because he's like, what is this? Like, this is not really what's supposed to be happening here. And I got to the end of it, and when I lifted my head up, I had that same epiphany of like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? And I lost all that time with my kids. And 3 weeks might not seem like a lot, but when your kids are little and they're growing and sprouting, I was like devastated at the end of it. And it really made me pause. And I think I think that's why your story is like hitting so deeply with me, because I took a minute. I was like, oh my God, like, I've been like rushing so fast towards this end goal of getting this one title or getting this salary range or, whatever it is. And then I wasn't paying attention to everything around me. And like everything around me was growing and changing, and I lost all that time. So that's where I was like finding the through line with your story.
Yeah, you're right. So similar.
It's crazy.
So similar. Oh, yes. I can imagine how those 3 weeks must have felt.
Yeah, it was intense. And listeners, I think that like it's a lot of like I know we speak mostly about like women and what women go through. And I think that this is like a situation or a scenario that like many women will encounter, is that like you're trying to fulfill the shoulds, like you said. So like, you did mention, and I want to circle back to this, like you felt like you had to act a certain way in certain scenarios. And I think that that's like a really important thing to kind of circle back to and maybe dive in more on the detail, because there's a lot of people that are like, well, I'm married now, so I should be doing this. Or I've just got this job, so I should be doing this. Or I'm supposed to have a baby. I'm 30. I need to have a baby now because I'm 30, which is like one of my things that I had. Like, none of those shoulds are real, right?
Yeah, none of them. I know, they're all we do them to ourselves, self-inflicted, self-imposed, whatever you want to call it. I know and I think, part of it's society, right? And who we follow and what we see. But I think a lot of it is just what we grew up with, maybe the
Mhm.
values we saw with our parents or our social groups and things like that. And like my best advice is to throw it all out the window and just do what you want to do, what feels right. Listen to your gut. I think we don't trust our gut as much as we should. And our gut knows. Our gut
Mhm.
knows what we want. And we get conflict between even our heart and our head. Like our head's telling us, don't do that or do this, or you have to talk this way. And our heart's telling us, oh, that doesn't feel right. And it's like we just have to, go with our heart and our gut a bit more and trust that we do know what's best for us.
What I had started doing, because I had that revelation, and that's actually how I ended up podcasting, by the way. Like it started with that. And then I started to take like online classes with different folks just to see like, oh, well, let me like test the waters because much like you, and again, like in my head, we're best friends, by the way, just so you know, like because of the book.
I love it.
Just because of the book, I was like, oh, we're friends? Okay. Much like you, I've always wanted to own my own business. I always had that entrepreneurial drive. When I was like 11 years old, I started a babysitting business. And I had a book of clients and I had a whole babysitting kit. And I went in deep with this and I had a lot of families depending on me. And I did it for like a couple of years. And I was like a little kid, just like running things. And it's always been something that I've wanted to do. So when I had that moment of like, I've gone so far down this path with my career, but now I'm realizing that this is not something I want to do. And I've just been doing it because I was checking this box. And I love what I do. Like, I love the work, but there just was something starting to go missing. And the joy started coming out of it. And so, what for me, I needed a creative outlet. And I think it sounded a little bit similar to you. Like, you needed that outlet. And for me, it was, well, I'm going to start podcasting. Like, I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm just going to start doing it because I had talked about it for like years.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great story. Funny. We have so many similarities, Jenny. I also was big into babysitting and had my own like babysitting kit I took around. So funny.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. So you left your corporate job. So now you're an entrepreneur. I have your book. I'm going to link, guys, everybody, I'm going to link her book in the description of the episode because I do really think that everyone should pick it up. And not just because I love it, but also because of the way it's written. So Shannon, because I work in communications, I'm paying really close attention to it. The way that it's written, it's not like science data heavy stuff. This is like legitimate. Shannon sharing her experiences. She's sharing experiences for other people. And she actually is doing a really good job of like drawing that through line of like, this is what happened to me, but this is my result of why I acted this way. And now you're seeing that. And to me personally, it's really helpful. I'm on the section of like finding what's lighting you up and the barriers that you tell yourself. So I do want you to elaborate on that too, because like, for many of us, we have this little inkling inside of us like, oh, I kind of really like this and I would love to do this, but it seems ridiculous that I would want to do this as a calling or as a living.
Yeah. So I'm gonna blow part of a chapter for all of you listening. You guess sneak preview. But one of my chapters is my 2 secret silly dreams. So in high school, I had 2 dreams. One was to be a writer. And the second one, which I thought was really out there, was to be a motivational speaker. And the motivational speaker one, I was on the students' council. I was a treasurer, like my background's kind of boring. I was the treasurer for a student council. And we were at this conference and I come from a town of 8,000 people, so really small. I was at a conference and I saw this guy and I couldn't even remember I couldn't tell you what he said. All I remember was the feeling I left with. And I left with this feeling of like, yes, we can do anything. And, just a really great feeling. And he wore all these silly hats. That's the only other thing I remember about him. I wish I knew his name. I'd love to find him. But there was that moment where I was like, oh, that I would love to do that one day. I would love to speak to groups and motivate them and excite them. But immediately it came with, oh, that's not a career. Like you can't, who does that for a living? And this
What are
is
you
in
thinking?
the 90s, right? So it's like really like, who does that? No one. So I pushed it aside and I never really let it come back. And then with writing, I'll never forget the one time I got a call home from a teacher. I think it was grade 11. It might have been after that, but after an English exam, my teacher called my house, wanted to speak to me, and said, the essay you wrote during your exam was amazing. Have you considered going into English or, something like that for university? And I went, nope, go into business, right? Like I had to go with the practical route. I'm like, in my head, I wouldn't have said this to him, but in my head, I'm like, writing's not a career. Come on. So it's two things, but the thing about our dreams is they never fully die, right? They sit inside us and they may be hidden for a while, but they started to pop back up to me. And for me, life is short and I'm a person who I want to feel fulfilled. I want to be excited about my day. I want to be doing work that's meaningful because we work like 90,000 hours in our lifetime. It's a lot. So for me, it was like, it got to a point where I'm like, no, it's time to pursue my goals and my dreams. And it has it's incredible. It's hard work. It's really hard. It was a steep learning curve, to learn the sales aspect and all of those types of things. But it has been so worth it to finally be like, yes, I'm doing what I used to think were silly and stupid, right? That weren't possible, that you couldn't make money from. And I'm doing it, I'm making money from it. So, whatever that dream is, whether it's to change industries or, go to a job with less responsibility, it doesn't matter what it is. It's try it out, see what you think. If it doesn't bring you joy, then and you can kill that dream. But you can never really kill it until you pursue it and see what happens.
I think that the one of the other parts of your book, and you touched on it a little bit here, is like the fear factor, and it's either I'm not gonna read verbatim because again, like I love the book so much. I just showed, by the way, everyone, I showed Shannon the copy of the book that I have, and there's tabs all over it because I'm literally like tabbing it and highlighting stuff. But the fear factor, and this was one for me that I felt like was really important. I want to mention this too, is the three different classifications of fear. It's like the people that will let the fear take over. They won't try to overcome it. It's just there, and they're like, I'm scared to do this. And then it's like the people who are willing to try to overcome their fear. And then it's those who will literally live in fear. And I'm sorry, completely fearless was the one. So I butchered it a little bit, but I started thinking about it, and I'm going to share this because the listeners are basically in my journey with me. I've been working on for podcasting because part of when little Jenny, when I was little, I also wanted to be a writer, by the way, and then wrote it off because I was like, well, I can't make money doing that. I also did that. But then ultimately I had always felt this really big drive to like help people. And when I was little, I really wanted to like change the world. I wanted to have an impact. And so through podcasting and getting to talk to all like yourself and all these amazing guests that I've had on here, something that I identified that I really enjoy doing is like coaching other people who want to do podcasting. And I had this sort of epiphany moment. I'm like, oh, you know what, Jenny? You could record modules. You could put together a guide. Like you could write up this whole thing. So I spent about 4 weeks-ish writing up a guide. I shot all of the learning modules. I've pretty much done all of the dirty work. And I am having trouble navigating the website funnels that will push it live. And it's been on pause for, I want to say, about 2 or 3 weeks. Now, granted, my kids were sick with stomach viruses, which, like there was a bunch of other stuff happening outside of it. And I kept thinking to myself, like, well, and I've said this to myself, like, well, it'll launch when it launches. It's right there. I just have to figure out this last step and then I'll be able to launch it. But in reading your book, I'm starting to think to myself, well, maybe I'm like delaying this on purpose. Like, and what am I so scared of? And I was reading through the exercises and the examples that you're providing. And to me now I'm thinking, well, you've put so much work into this. Perhaps now you're scared that you're going to put it out there. No one's going to want it. And then you're going to feel like, well, damn, I did all this work and I've got nothing to show for it. So that's kind of like
Yeah.
where I'm at today. I'm like, Jenny, come on, girl.
Yeah. And it's true, right? And those are very valid and legitimate fears that everyone has. And I'm sure everyone listening can relate to you, whatever project they're holding on to and whatnot. But it's interesting. I don't, a quote from Jade Shetty stands out for me. He shared that he releases his podcast episodes when he feels they're about 70% there.
Mm.
And that to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I love that, because he's a perfectionist and he would strive for perfection. And if we strive for perfection, we're never going to release the darn thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are those, what is that minimum criteria you need to have? And then release it. And I think the beautiful thing is what you're releasing, it can be updated, it can be edited, it can be changed, right?
I will say, I have come to a point where, especially like with podcast stuff. So just so you know, like in the beginning when I was podcasting would like try to perfect every episode. And I talk about this in my guide a little bit, where I was like driving myself insane, trying to take out every little gap and like trying to make sure everything was 100% there. And then the person that was coaching me literally said, she was like, I don't do that. And I was like, what? And she was like, I don't even really listen to it again. I just throw in the music and like post it, because unless there was like something major, you don't really have to do anything. And the first 3 months were like so stressful. And then after I came to this realization of like, oh, wait, I don't have to like be that crazy. Okay. Everything kind of just like streamlined after that. And it was so much easier. And then podcasting became fun again. And I was like, oh, it's not as stressful as I was making it out to be. This is okay. And in terms of the guide, like in my head, I'm like, it's done. Like, it looks great. It's there. I like had somebody QC it for me. They were like, this is solid. You're all right. You can go there. And it's just one of those things where I'm like, I need to like sit down and just do it. And so I'm like, I am literally scheduling time to be like, Jenny, you're doing this. It's happening kind of thing, because that fear factor is real. So, I mean, for listeners, for you guys who are, especially in this day and age, I think our generation growing up, it was a lot of like, you should be doing things a certain way. Like in my household, you had to go to college. You had to go. There was no thoughts around it. You couldn't go to trade school. You had to go to college. And I think today that narrative has shifted so much that like even I tell my kids, I'm like, you really don't have to go to college. Like you could do something else and be highly successful. And that's like the benefit I think we all have at our fingertips now, right? Like you can do what you want with your passions.
Yeah. And I think the other beautiful thing about all this too, and like for our kids, is they don't need jobs are going to be available to them that none of us know about right now, right?
Oh yeah.
So even thinking about, if anyone, has their career path. And I remember one of my mentors, as great as she was, I was in my 30s when she was mentoring me, and she would tell me, you need to know what the job is you want before you retire. Well, at the time, like I didn't even know I was going to become an entrepreneur. I didn't know where I was going. Like if I had to say anything, I probably would have said like, I'll be a senior vice president then at a company. But I just find that advice kind of dated now, because we don't need to know where we're going. Yeah, it's great to have a plan, and it's great to know, okay, what's your next move or the 2 moves after that, or like, what are those exciting projects you want to take on? It's great to have like an idea, but I don't think we need to worry so much about, okay, what do the next 10 years of my career look like?
Yeah.
Because we may not know, and it may change. And that's the other thing. It's okay if our dreams change. That was another big one for me that was hard to get over was, I used to say, oh, this is my dream job. So when I got the job in advertising, it was amazing. I had the biggest team I'd had yet. I got to fly to Chicago once a month from Toronto. I was going to be flying to New York City, and then the pandemic hit. But, on paper, like I was like, oh, this is the dream. This is it. And then when I changed into having my own business, I felt weird telling people, because I'm like, oh, but I just told them I was doing my dream job. And now I'm doing my dream job. And it's like, are they thinking like, Shannon, get your stuff together? Like, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. And I think it's the thing is we don't have to get so hung up on terminology or career paths or anything. It's just, follow your passions and do what feels right. And, we might fail and that's okay. And we'll learn from it. And then we just keep going.
I think that I know for me, like fear of failure doesn't hit so hard for me only because like I have basically trained myself in corporate that I am going to fail at least once on everything. Everything that I do, I'll probably fail at least once or at least not hit it out of the park once. And with that though, I've basically coached myself into being like, all right, Jenny, well, you've made a mistake, but now you're going to be so much stronger because of that mistake. And so the folks that I coach professionally for like my daytime job, and it gets confusing when I talk about all of it, but like for my daytime job, the people that I've mentored over the years, that's how I've told them, like, you're going to make mistakes. And even like for all entrepreneurs, for any path that you're going to take, and even podcasting, you're going to make mistakes. Like that's part of the whole process because you're figuring it out and you're figuring out the best method for yourself. Not every entrepreneur looks the same. Nobody's processes are the same. I'm finding that out like every person that I interview, and I've interviewed a lot of authors on the podcast for the spring series, and everybody's had a different process. It looks overall it's like all the same, but like everyone's kind of different in how they've approached things. So I actually do have a question for you. I know that you went from corporate and you did start doing speaking engagements. What inspired you to write your book?
So my book was, how old am I? I'm turning 43 next month, which is funny. Last week I was telling people I was turning 42, so I was off by a year. A year. And so I started work in the 2000s. And when I started work, I love self-help books. And I would go to the library, or not the library. Well, yeah, that too. But I would go to a bookstore and I'd look for the books that I'm like, I want to read somebody's real life experience. I want somebody to tell me or to share at least how they did it. How did they balance their career with being a mom or just like with being a woman in corporate? I wanted to know. And I found, I'd get very like, oh, here's a leadership book where it was very, business driven, which I still, there's some great ones out there. But there was just no book out there that I wanted that would help guide me. And I also found, in my experience, a lot of the women I worked for and with, they also, they didn't go around sharing their stories as much, right? It felt vulnerable. It felt, you didn't want to share that maybe you felt like you were failing as being a mom. And so I really was craving that learning from experience, learning from people's stories. And when I heard a former CEO of a coffee shop here in Canada called Second Cup, she shared a story of failing as a mom, basically, in a talk that she gave when I was doing my MBA. And I include her story in my book because it was so powerful. And it was the first time I'd ever heard another woman openly share her story, but then how she also went on to become a CEO of a huge company and becoming a better mom. So, up until then, you almost heard, oh, you can't have it all. You can only, choose a mom or choose a career. You can't have both and blah, blah. And well, I agree there's give and take, especially when our kids are young. It's hard. Certain things are hard. But she was that example of here's how you can do it, but here's what you need to sacrifice to get there.
Yeah.
And so that was the book I wanted to write. I wanted to share stories of my stories, other people I found inspiring. So I think I include 10 stories of other women across different fields, include their stories, plus some practical exercises to actually help readers get to where they want to go and create that more meaningful life, whatever it looks like for them. Whether it is, in corporate, whether it's as an entrepreneur, whether it's a stay-at-home mom, it doesn't matter, but it's tools that they can take and they can do something with.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said how much that story of the CEO for the coffee shop, like how it hit you because it was the first time you heard somebody like openly admit, or excuse me, not somebody, a woman openly admit like a failure, especially as a mom. I think that and part of the basis of this podcast, part of the reason why Steel Roses even exists is because my cousin who I originally launched the podcast with, we kept having these conversations about like, oh, this is so hard. Motherhood is so hard. Being a professional and a mom is so hard. My cousin is a professor, so she was like juggling all these things. And then you have social media and people just showing these picture perfect snaps and my husband's showering me in flowers and it's so seamless and beautiful and I have all the things and life is so lovely. But then you have like every single person who's looking at that is comparing themselves and saying like, oh, well, that's not how my life is. Maybe like there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my kids, my husband. There's something wrong with what I'm doing. But the reality of it is like the raw deal is that we are all hitting those same struggles. We're all failing in some way, like not majorly failing, but we are having failures in our eyes in some way. Realistically, like this is the norm. It's not a failure. Like there's times where, and I will say like there was a part in your book where you talked about your son's, hit when he had to go to the hospital and you felt this tremendous guilt because you were like, damn, I should have taken him sooner to the doctor. And I have had that happen to me where I was so busy prioritizing other things that it took me longer. And I would have this tremendous guilt, like I failed here, but it's not a failure. We all go through it. And having that transparency, I think, is so sorely needed amongst women. For some reason, we all carry this immense shame and feel like we need to show up to each other as if we're perfect and we're running things perfectly. And that is not at all the case. I was at the school bus stop the one day, and I'm going to share this story because it was like one of those moments where I was like, I'm being judged, but I don't care. And all the moms are kind of just standing there talking about these lunches that they're preparing and all these dinners and what are you cooking tonight? And then they kind of looked at me because I wasn't saying anything. And I was like, I pay for school lunch every day and we order out like 3 times a week because I'm super busy and I can't handle it. And everyone was like, oh. And I was like, I'm super busy. I've always been very much of a like realist. Let's be real here. And I am not able to do all the things all the time. When I do make my homemade meals or when I am able to do that, like I try to do it really well, but like you can't do all the things. You do have to have some give and take there and be transparent and not non-judgmental with other women. We're all going through this. Like everyone's going through it. So I appreciate your sharing that too, because it's like, yeah, that was the first time you probably ever heard a woman saying like, I failed here, but this is the great outcome that came out of it. Nobody ever talks like that. And it kills me.
Yeah. And that's how we learn too. And it's also how we feel less alone, right? When we can share and learn from each other, we realize, oh, I'm not the only one who orders takeout 3 nights a week. Oh, phew. Okay. Right. Yeah.
And yeah, it's, I laugh about it because I still see it and I still encounter women and moms who kind of, who have that judgmental kind of tone there. And it always kind of surprises me because I'm like, why are you acting like that? We're just all real people here. We're all just trying to make it through this. Like, it's not a big deal, like we're just trying to make it. But yeah, I think your book really, it's so important. It's so sorely needed. And again, like the language and the tone of your book is very much like a friend is like sitting there chatting with me and like telling me all the things. So as an entrepreneur, speaker, you're an author, like how are you balancing, and let me know if this is cool to talk about, but balancing like managing that, but also managing your stress level now, because I know that was an issue before, like different tactics that you're using.
Well, speaking of being open and transparent, I actually just took the last month off which I have never done in my life. I know it's a privilege to do it. I know it's not possible for a lot of people, but I launched my book in January. And I'm a recovering overachiever, but still it's still there. So I launched my book in January. I was doing all these podcast interviews, mailing books to have reviewed, doing guest articles. On top of, I had my busiest quarter I've ever had for speaking engagements, and related to the book, but also not related to the book because I
Right.
speak on different topics like burnout and happiness and things like that. And then I launched a new coaching program to help women uncover their passion and, figure out what they want to do with their careers. So I launched that, and it was I did too much, too much. And I didn't get to burnout because this time I knew to recognize it. And so I took a month off, and I got back on track with exercising, eating healthier. I agree. I'm not all about I don't need to eat healthy 100% of the time, but I'd swung way too far the other way.
Yeah.
I got back on track with that. And also, for any of you entrepreneurs listening, it can be lonely, right? So it was me doing a lot of stuff on my own. So I started to get more involved in the community again. And I started exercising with one of my friends in the morning and doing things like that to really fill my cup up again. My husband also had foot surgery, which meant he couldn't drive or walk the kids to or from school or do grocery shopping or any of the stuff that normally he takes on at least 50%, if not more of.
Yeah.
So it just became, April was this month of, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. So I took the month off, and it was the best thing I could have done, because now I'm starting with energy, and, I was able to get clarity on where I wanted to go with my business. And again, the one thing I want to stay away from, the area I won't let myself get up to again is when I'm so stressed out that I'm taking it out on my kids.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that I'm nope, that happened, and I'm never going back there again. And just my time with them, they're 9 and 11. They still want to hang out with me. So I'm I'm going to milk that for all I can right now, because it is so lovely. And I know it's not going to be for much longer.
I know. You only have I think about that a lot, actually, because right now my kids are the twins just turned 7 and my son turned 8 in March. So we're right behind you. We're coming up right behind you. And they are still very much attached to me. They all want to spend one-on-one time with me. And I do go a little crazy because I try to make sure that I do get at least one day for each kid, that I can do something with each kid. I've also had major problems with taking things out on my kids, stress related. If I have a bad day at work, not recently, because I have been working so hard at course correcting that. But I would, because I work from home, and I would literally step out of the office door and they were already what's for dinner? This, and there was no buffer for me, and I would just be a raging maniac. And the kids started to say to me things like, well, mommy, would it be all right if you just don't work so much? Do you have to work all the time? Because my laptop was literally always glued to me at that point. So I've taken a lot of steps back, but I also, because you shared your month off, I actually am just starting discussions now with my employer to scale down to a 4-day work week, because it's just so much stuff. And for now, it'll just be for the summertime, because I'm my kids are going to be home, for the most part. And I'm I want to be able to not be glued to my desk the whole time. I want to have that flexibility. And as you mentioned, I know that that's not something everyone can do. This is the first time I've ever even considered doing it. But it's one of those steps that I'm I feel like I need to do this at this point. There's a driving force behind me that just keeps saying, I'm in the back of my mind, you have to take this time off, because it's not just, I do have my daytime job, which is a full 40-hour plus work week. And then I have podcasting as well. And then this, the learning modules and all this other stuff that I was trying to do. And it did get to a point where I was I'm throwing so much at the wall, but nothing is getting done. Nothing is sticking, because I'm trying to do too many things at once. So I'm also trying to take that time to be I need to recalibrate this. And for the entrepreneurs listening, the other thing too, Shannon, and I want to know if you noticed this as well. the self-imposed pressure on yourself to like hit deadlines. And I was talking to one of the women that I know that also podcasts. Have accountability calls once a month. And I said to her, I was like, I'm driving myself insane trying to hit these certain deadlines. And then it occurred to me, Jenny, you're the one who's setting the deadlines. Just move it on out.
Yeah. Yeah. I've started doing that as well. I looked at April and I was like, oh, I've got, there's quite a few things going on. But at the same time, it's like, Shannon, you started your own business so you could be in control and have more flexibility. So I did. I was able to, reach out, and my clients, I can be choosy about who I work with, right? Because in my past life, I've worked with some pretty horrible clients. And I'm like, no, I'm going to work with people that I really enjoy working with. So they're fantastic. So when I reached out to them, I shared, and they were okay to pause for the month. And other things got pushed out, and it's okay. And I think that's the thing too, right? We're so driven around productivity and getting the most done and things like that. And I know it's overused a lot right now too, but rest really does improve our productivity.
Yeah.
It really does. And this last month proved it for me too, because now when I sit down and write my posts and my emails that I send and things like that, like in the last 2 days, I've written more than I probably would have written in the month because I have more clarity and I have more energy.
It's amazing the wisdom that comes as you get older. I turned 40 in December, and it was almost like this, like, again, like epiphany moment. And I'm just like, dang, if I had known all this stuff in my earlier days, like I probably would be in a different kind of a situation now, because I always felt so like I was the woman who was like, I will work 15 hours a day for you. No problem. Even when my kids were babies, my husband sent me a picture the other day, and because we reminisce back and forth. And I was sitting on a recliner, and the twins were infants. So I had one twin here under an arm and one twin was laying on my lap. And then my son was laying on the other arm, and my laptop was propped up on a pillow, and I had headphones in, and you can very clearly see in the picture, I was running an advisory board call.
Wow.
But all the kids were just sleeping on top of me because I was like, I don't have a choice. They want to be with mommy. It's okay. I'll just keep going. And I'm like, I could have like said, hey guys, can't do it tonight. There's all these little moments, and I always struggled with that. And that's something that, especially now that I have kids, the other part of it too is like, I want to give an example of like a healthy balance versus like over indexing so far into all the should you do and, trying to be perfect and all that stuff. And, even we talked about like deadlines and things as an entrepreneur, but even like for stay-at-home moms, if you're hitting a wall and you're like, well, I'm not able to, read with my kid every day, or if I'm not able to get these learning things in, or I can't take them to the library, like it's okay to flex and to pivot, like you're not going to hit it out of the park every day. You're not going to get your kid to eat their vegetables every day. I can barely get my son to eat broccoli or any kind of vegetable. It's like an ongoing battle, but it's just one of those things that like, it's okay. Like he'll be okay. Eventually he'll eat some vegetables.
He will 100%. And I think it's a great point about for stay-at-home moms and things too. I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but I think during COVID, I almost swung the other way where, for the first bit of COVID, my career was, I was working, 11, 12-hour days. It was ridiculous. It was long. And I was so mad at people who posted that they're making sourdough and things like this. Cause I'm like, yeah, I don't have time to do anything. But great for you that you have all this free time, right? So I was in the opposite end where I was busier because work,
COVID.
Our clients were like, well, you're just at home now, so you can work 24/7. Why not? Right? So work was really busy, and plus you were just available. So like, my boss would call me all the time just to check in, and it just, no one was traveling. So my work, a lot of people used to travel, but no one was traveling anymore. So it was like you had way more meetings, just everything got a little out of control. But then I found it kind of swung the other way with me with parenting because we pulled our kids from daycare. I started walking them to and from school. started, thinking, oh, I need to have play dates for them and I need to be putting them in activities because they missed out during COVID and things like that. And I'm hearing this from a lot of my friends too. It's like, now the kids are so overbooked, or we're just a chauffeur for our kids, or they're doing so much now that it's like, okay, now I need to find that balance, right? Where I'm not with my kids 24/7 anymore. And it's like coming back into the middle where I'm still able to, run my career and do what I want to do there, spend time with my kids, but also have time for myself, because we all need time for ourselves. And I think that's the first thing that tends to go when we're busy.
Yeah, 100%. It's something that I also every day think about, because as I mentioned, and now you're getting a better sense of me, I do try to do 1,000 things all the time. And prioritizing time for myself has always been a struggle. And so what I started doing, I read this book, The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it.
Actually, you're in the 5 a.m. club, so it's kind of it's about the same. It's similar. So I've started getting up earlier, because at first I was annoyed because I wanted to make sure I had time for myself, but I'm like, why do I have to get up early? This kind of sucks. But the reality of it is, when I get up early and I get in the meditation that I need and all of that stuff, and then I get to read a couple pages, which is where your book comes in, and then I get to do some exercise. I have about an hour in the morning to myself where I'm just doing this practice, and I've been doing it for 3 months, and it has totally shifted everything about my life. Everything that's been going on has totally shifted, only because I wake up an hour earlier and make sure that I get some time to myself. On the weekends, if I don't do it, I feel way off, and I'm looking forward to Monday so that I can have that time in the morning. So I know it's hard as a mom, because I am the first one to deprioritize myself, but making sure, even if it's 10 minutes in the bathroom and you're pretending you're taking a shower, but you're not taking a shower, that's a good point to make and say, I just need 10 minutes to just sit here and think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for me, similar to you, starting morning routine is what finally got me that time alone, that time for meditation, time to exercise. It just really changed me to be more patient and to have more energy as well. So it was a huge game changer for me as well.
It's interesting, because I do have more energy when I wake up earlier, which is actually a little bit
ironic, right? I know.
It's weird, right? It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and somehow I'm okay, this is great. I'm by 7 a.m. I'm ready to rock and get everybody going. But if I woke up at 6:30, I would be a groggy mess and not be able to handle it. So it's a huge, huge impact. Shannon, thank you so much for sharing your story and for putting your story into words, because again, I think that this is so important for just women to acknowledge that there are gaps, there's things that we're not doing for ourselves. We need to come out stronger. And if not for yourself, teach it to yourself. If you have kids, to make sure that you're showing this example to them. It's hugely important that everything we do, it's setting up for the next generation too. So that's the other thing. If you have a barrier doing it for yourself, then do it for your kids.
Yes. Love that.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you coming on and joining us. And listeners, I'll include in the description the link to the book, and I'll include Shannon's information. So if you want any websites or social, they can reach out to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, and hope everyone breaks free and follows their passion.
Have a great day, everyone. Until next time.